morning. Welcome to this joint overview and scrutiny committee. I am Councillor Mary McLaren and I will be chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some of the domestic arrangements. Please ensure that you maintain social distancing from all other persons whilst in the chamber and in the communal areas. Please ensure that you wear a face covering at all times unless you are sitting down or if you are exempt from doing so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes provided. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or are switched off. We will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov.app, so please could members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting that it will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you hear the alarm, leave the building immediately via a fire exit and make your way to the assembly point, that is Ipswich Town Football Ground. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exit at each end of the floor. Do not enter the atrium, that is the ground floor area and walkways. If you are in the atrium at the time of the alarm, follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Use the stairs, not the lifts. Do not enter the building until told it is safe to do so. Can I just welcome the following officers to this meeting? We have Emily Ewell, Monitoring Officer, and Teresa Halliday, Service Manager for the Shared Legal Service, and Robert Carmichael is our Governance Officer in attendance. And I think that is everybody, yes?
We have also Vicky Mosley and Royston Emerson will be joining for the Citizens Advice
but they're
items.
not here at the moment?
Not at the moment,
no.
No.
Okay. Can I move to the agenda, please? So, please can we have apologies and substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies this morning from Councillor Catherine Grandon and Councillor Keith Scarf, and Councillor Stephen Phillips is substituting for Councillor Keith Scarf.
Thank you. Declaration of interests. Councillor Muller.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I should declare that I am a trustee board member of the Mid-Suffolk Citizens Advice. Thank you. Item 11.
Any more declarations of interest? Thank you. Can we now go... Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. In relation to Councillor Muller, I'm only an observer with the Sudbury Citizens Advice, but I'd declare that I am an observer on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Any declarations of interest? Thank you. We now need to go to the minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 20th of September 2021. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? No. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Muller. A seconder, please? Councillor Carter. The Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote will now show as in progress on your modern.gov app in a light blue colour. If members could please go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner of their agenda, it will show on there. And Councillor Phillips, could I please take your vote verbally?
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you.
I think, Robert, you're going to have to take mine. Difficult at getting in. My vote would be abstain because I was not at the last meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Yeah, I have the same problem, but I have to abstain on that one as well.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. The vote has been completed, and that's 5 for, 1 against, and 4 abstentions.
Thank you. Thank you that the minutes of the 22nd of September have been confirmed, and I will sign the minutes after the meeting. Thank you. We go on to item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Questions by the public?
None received, Chair.
Can I just get a... I made a mistake voting on those minutes, and I voted against instead of abstain. Would it be possible to change that vote?
What we can do, Councillor, if we rerun the vote, would that be acceptable, Chair?
Yeah.
And just go through it again, just to make sure that that's clear. So, if I go... No problem at all, Councillor. So, what I'll do is I will restart it again, so that it's all clear that everything... So, if members could go back to the mob.gov app, it will show again in progress. Councillor Phillips, could I just confirm your vote again? Abstain again, thank you.
Well, I've voted, but it's not showing up. I think we're having some problems electronically here.
Councillor Carter?
Can I just ask councillors if they are having issues voting to check which internet connection we are connected to? If the computers have a habit signing into one or the other, and Modern Gov is not allowing for voting if it is into either the O2 internet or to things, so make sure it's on the WL35 generic, and it will allow for voting to work on your computer.
And what I'll do, Chair, is if I just take the votes that are remaining as verbally, if that's acceptable.
Yes.
So, Councillor McLaren, if I could take your vote, please.
Abstain.
And Councillor Osborne. Abstain. Thank you very much. So, Sorry, Chair, apologies, just getting that. So that is 5 for, none against, and 5 abstentions. I think, Councillor, that's correct, isn't it, Councillor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So, just to repeat, the minutes of meeting have now been confirmed, and I will sign them after the meeting. I think I'd actually reached questions by councillors on the agenda. Robert, have we received any?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. So, we are now having a presentation of the review of the shared legal service, and I'm happy to welcome Teresa Halliday. Teresa, if you'd like to give us your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, committee members. The report is an overview of the legal service. It's your in-house legal service. Officers within the service are employed by either Babergh, Mid-Suffolk or West Suffolk councils. The report in front of you provides you with details of the budget allocation, how the management structure, in that the service is an in-house service. I'm the service manager. I'm employed by West Suffolk, but I work equally across all 3 councils. And then I report to a steering committee, which consists of the Director for Law and Governance at West Suffolk, and Emily Yule, who's the Assistant Director for Law and Governance at Babergh, or for Babergh Mid Suffolk. And then we report to leadership teams across the 3 authorities. Financial performance is, we have a case management system, so every matter that we're instructed on is opened within that system. The system has what's called 2 instances. One is a Babergh and Mid-Suffolk instance, and the other is a West Suffolk instance. Currently, we don't separate whether the report comes from Babergh or the instruction comes from Babergh or from Mid-Suffolk. It just comes as a Babergh Mid-Suffolk instruction. But what we are looking to do from the next financial year is introduce something into the case management system which enables us to report those separately. The cost split is based on is currently based on the amount of matters that we have, the complexity of those matters, because you can have 5 instructions for a simple debt recovery for one authority, but that will equate to one more difficult and complex matter that will take longer to complete. So we have a volume plus complexity, amount of hours it takes against each matter. The initial split was based on the budgets. So the budget for the legal service for West Suffolk and the budget for Babergh Mid Suffolk was put together, and the split was based on the differences between those budgets, because it was a bringing together of all those staff into that one structure. The work we undertake ranges from a simple debt recovery, a commercial lease, to a more complicated judicial review or prosecution, an injunction. But it's fairly even across all the directorates within each of the authorities. We are instructed in the same way anyone in another service is provided with a piece of work to do. We receive an email asking if we can provide legal advice. We have a generic email box to receive those. We don't identify, other than putting it into the case management system, whether we're working for Babergh, Mid-Suffolk or West Suffolk. We are just providing a legal service. So the priority is looked at. We don't prioritise one authority over another. It's about the work and when the work needs to be completed. And that's it really, unless anyone's got any questions.
Can I put that to committee now? If you would like to ask questions of the officer, Councillor Ekpinion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a couple of questions. I understand that the split of the budget is basically an apportionment of budgets that already existed, rather than on any other criteria. But I do note that, in fact, in paragraph 3.5, there are more employees on the West Suffolk side than there are on the Babergh Mid Suffolk side, and I wondered to what extent that might weigh on things. But I'd like to get into the detail of the graph in paragraph 3.10. I'd like to get some explanation of these numbers. Babergh Sustainable Community seems to have a lot of instructions, way more than anybody else, and then followed by Planning for Growth. What is that? And could we have some detail around the instructions from Assets and Investments, please?
So in terms of your first question, initially it was a bringing together of two budgets. Since then, we've had the case management system. So for the first 2 years, budgets were based on the two budgets across the authorities, 3 budgets across the authorities. Now we look at the case management system and the volume of matters coming from each authority to determine how that split is going to be managed, and that's something for the steering group to consider when they're presented with reports. We report to the steering group quarterly. The next meeting in December is to review the split for the next financial year. Up to date, it hasn't been necessary to alter that split based on the volume of work. In terms of the graph, sustainable communities is very high. That's commercial leases, acquisitions. Our property and commercial team is the largest team within the service because the volume of work is the highest across all 3 authorities, because we have a lot of commercial leases, acquisitions, right to buy scheme for Babergh Mid Suffolk. Planning again is a high volume because we have 3 planning committees we support and provide advice for. Does that help?
Does that answer your question?
Not entirely. So sustainable communities is all to do with commercial leases and similar. And so I fail to understand why it's under sustainable communities, to be fair, because you also have a section that's housing, as well as and you've got assets and investment. It just seems the descriptive tag doesn't seem to gel with me, really.
I apologise. The descriptive tag is the directorate from which those instructions are coming. There are more descriptions than current directorates, because whenever there's a change, structure change across the authorities, and they change the name of a directorate or they move a service from one directorate to another, we can't alter that all on the case management system without taking it straight back to day one. So we create new matters under the new structure, but we may still have open matters under the old structure. So, but I can't tell you why those come from that directorate, other than that's where the instructions are coming from.
I think you may have contradicted yourself in that response. So the instructions are coming from sustainable communities. So my question was, what does commercial leases have to do with sustainable communities?
I'm afraid I'm unable to answer that question, because we're acting from the instructing officer and which directorate they're sitting in. I don't create where that comes from. I don't know if you want to help, Emily.
Emily, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors. So I think there might be some confusion around the term sustainable communities. That was the Assistant Director area that encompassed planning and communities. So planning and communities on this chart was the former name, then it converted to sustainable communities. Now it's actually changed again because communities has gone in with the wellbeing and communities directorate. So you can see some of the challenges that Teresa's team has every time we make a management structure change that affects the case management system, and it's difficult to repair those or alter those retrospectively. I think some of these commercial leases come from the section that used to sit in with the sort of SIL team about acquisitions in terms of residential properties. I think that's the cases that are referring to there. Where it's purely commercial properties, that of course would sit in assets and investments if it's our own property or in economic development.
Thank you, Emily. Does that help you, Councillor?
This is a much clearer explanation, Madam Chairman, but it does beg the question is what are we going to do about this system, because clearly it's not keeping pace with the way that the council is being organised.
I accept that. And of course, in terms of your comment, you were looking at communities as it's seen within our present makeup of, let's say, the Cabinet and the responsibilities. So thank you, Teresa, for clarifying that. Thank you.
Am I right in thinking that they're still doing the same job, just the title's changed?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a series of questions. Can I refer to 3.5? And Councillor Ekping asked about the 9 officers employed by Babergh and Mid Suffolk and the 14 employed by West Suffolk. My question is around the salaries and the terms of employment, reimbursement of expenses and travelling and so on. This is the first question. That is, are the terms and conditions, the employment conditions, identical? So I saw a shake of heads. Is that a problem? Do you want to take the questions one at a time? Yeah.
No, the employees are under their current authority's working terms and conditions. And the reason we have a different volume of staff appointed by one authority to another is because we have different rates of pay across West Suffolk and Babergh and Mid Suffolk. We try to align the job types so that we don't have 2 lawyers doing exactly the same job sitting next to each other on different rates of pay and terms and conditions. So we try to appoint a lawyer to one authority, a job type to one particular authority. So we have our support team are in the majority employed by West Suffolk, our lawyers, Babergh and Mid Suffolk, our business partners, currently West Suffolk. And so that's so people in the same job type, there's not that discrepancy about, well, you know, they're working the same job as me, but they're earning more money.
Well, I think you probably answered what was going to be my next question, and that is, if there is a vacancy or you reorganise and so you recruit, how do you decide whether it's West Suffolk who recruits or Babergh Mid Suffolk recruits? If it's, let's say it's a new post into your family tree.
Yep, we work very closely together. One authority will take the lead on the recruitment. Quite often West Suffolk takes the lead on recruitment simply because that's our principal place of work for the whole of the service. But we work very closely with Babergh Mid Suffolk, and if we appoint to a Babergh or Mid Suffolk authority, then I speak with my HR business partner and work with them on the recruitment for that post.
Sorry, each of your answers is leading me on to a different question. So you're using West Suffolk HR, presumably this service pays a fee to West Suffolk HR? No, right, okay. Now, my next question is, if more than 50% of the work is for Babergh Mid-Suffolk District Council, why are there fewer staff employed by Babergh Mid-Suffolk District Council?
It's based on the job type. So if a West Suffolk lawyer who was there from day one moves on, leaves the authority, we would try to appoint to a Babergh Mid-Suffolk post that they're aligned with the remaining lawyers in that structure. And that's why the balance has changed from day one, because we've tried to align the job types rather than the individual's original place of employment.
Sorry, is it okay to carry on? Oh, sorry.
Councillor Willam, just a minute. Emily wants to just add to that. Emily, thank you.
Thank you. I just wondered if I could just add an extra bit of context to that arrangement. When the partnership was created, we made a conscious decision not to transfer all of the staff to one of the partner authorities, almost as a way of preserving each of the partners' interests should the service ever dissolve, so that there wouldn't be one of the partner authorities without any legal team if it was ever decided that we wanted to uncouple. So we made that conscious decision not to do a 2P transfer or similar at that time, so that all of the partner authorities still directly employed some of their legal experts. How it works in terms of recharging is when we do the kind of total share of costs, we do a quarterly recharge between the authorities, and Babergh and Mid-Suffolk will recharge West Suffolk for the proportion of staff costs for those people that we directly employ, and vice versa for West Suffolk. So it's almost irrelevant that Babergh and Mid-Suffolk have 9 directly employed and West Suffolk have 14, because the costs of all the staff are shared proportionately in that split of costs that we operate across the whole service.
Thank you. Now that's led me on to another question. I'm sorry. So if we were to decouple, that seems to suggest that, say, West Suffolk would have all of the lawyers or all of the business partners, and we'd end up with the support staff in Babergh Mid-Suffolk. So I guess it's not going to be so. I mean, this is an observation rather than a question. I'm just a little bit concerned that it's fine that all of the lawyers are employed by the one authority, if that's the case, but there'll have to be some sort of alternative arrangement if there's a decoupling.
Councillor Willam, can you just restrict that to the debate, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I have got one more question, and this is a question. With the complicated cases, I understand that all the complicated cases seem to be more or less costed at the same level of cost. So if there is, let's say, a really complicated case, such as a judicial review, is there a record of how much time was spent by staff at various levels, and also a record of the external input for each of the complicated cases? And is that part of the recharge, the quarterly review recharge?
So we don't recharge per matter. We are in-house service. So our only recharge is based on salaries and on costs. More complex, every single matter that we're instructed on is recorded in our case management system, and officers record their time spent against each of those matters. But that's simply to help us with the understanding of the split between the authorities. We don't charge individually for every matter we're instructed on, whether it's a simple matter or a complex matter.
But if there was a need for specialist advice or a barrister or whatever, does the shared legal service employ that individual? Right.
If we are required to outsource for any particular reason, so whether that's engaging a barrister to assist in a complex judicial review matter, then the legal service would lead on the engagement of that particular counsel or advice, but we would work closely with the instructing officer to ensure they were happy with that engagement. The reason the shared service leads on that engagement is because we build relationships with barristers and external firms, and so they're used to contacting us, but we always work very closely with the instructing officer.
And the, let's say it's a barrister, they send their bill to the shared service, not to the...
Correct, and
Okay.
it's budgeted out of whichever budget was required to pay for that, whether it's a legal service budget or another department's.
Thank you. I'm out of questions, Chair.
Any more questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I wondered, looking at the data that you provided in 3.10, that's sort of very basic data, really, on just pure numbers, no analysis whatsoever. A little bit more on the other tables. Do you have some performance tables on time taken to resolve matters?
Yes, absolutely. This is simple data, I agree, but we can call off reports on many aspects of the case management system, including how long a particular case takes, the amount of time recorded by each officer against a case. I'm trying to think of other, it's mainly hours spent against the amount of disbursements that have been created or external costs against a particular matter is all recorded.
And can I just ask, what then do you highlight some areas that are of concern because the matter is taking too long to resolve, or what actions
Absolutely.
are taken?
We always look back. We work very closely with other service managers and other directorates who are sending us a lot of information or a lot of instructions at one time. So we look through and say, why has this taken longer? Is there something that we could be more proactive about up front, or is it just one of those complicated matters that looks simple to begin with and then turned into a more complex matter? We have a complexity scoring when a matter, when we're instructed on a new matter, that we give it to say, well, this could take an experienced lawyer 2 months to complete from start to finish. But if that becomes complicated, that complexity scoring can be upgraded or downgraded if it turns into an easier matter, but they must discuss that with their line manager before that complexity is changed.
Councillor Barrett.
Just interested to know then if, in terms of performance, pure performance of that individual member of staff, acknowledging some complexity of a matter, if it was still not becoming resolved, who is responsible then? Is that within your service to pursue some improvement in that performance, or is that down to those individual councils? Where does that sit?
No, that absolutely sits with me and my management team, my business partners I call the management team. It sits with us initially. If a member of our service isn't performing, then we would look at that alongside their performance reviews. Then if there was a concern that there was a team that wasn't performing, I would take that to my directorate or assistant director and say, look, there's definitely a concern in here. And, it would only go up through in the same way as if somebody in the planning team wasn't performing or somebody in the housing team wasn't performing. It would escalate in exactly the same way.
Councillor Barrett. Councillor Eckpinion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to refer the officer to the chart in 3.11. So currently we have, between the two authorities, just over 1,100 current cases. So my question is that typical? How has the number of cases flowed from the previous couple of years into the current year, and what's the trend looking like?
Yep, this is a snapshot of the number taken at the time of the report, but it is the chart at 3.11 is very similar to that for West Suffolk as well, just a slight variation in each area. But yes, the busiest teams are planning and property. Commercial, slightly less. Litigation fluctuates because litigation is very much based on the number of instructions they receive, whether there is one prosecution or 10. It all depends what's happening across the authorities as to how busy they are, but they also support licensing and other regulatory matters. But yes, this is an average snapshot of how the team is performing.
If I could come back, Madam Chairman. So I understand that this is a snapshot. I think the crux of my question is, how does this compare to previous years? I mean, are the numbers going up, or are they going down, or?
Numbers are going up. There's an upward trend, particularly in the property team. We have a lot more instructions than we ever used to. I think there's also a knock-on effect from the COVID pandemic, because matters slowed down, but then they did the stamp duty holiday, and matters just progressed from then, really, and it's just a continuing upward trend. In other areas, it fluctuates.
Councillor Caston.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to sort of define a matter. If a file's opened, could there be several matters on that file, or is that what you would describe as a matter? Because obviously with litigation, there could be a matter of litigation on a file that's got, you know, for something else. Yeah, could you define that, please?
No, each instruction has its own matter opened on our case management system, unless it's something that would be dealt with within half an hour from start to finish. Then we put it into a general file. Otherwise, we'd have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of matters that wouldn't show up in any graph because they'd only have a half hour recorded against them. But yes, so if we have planning, judicial, so a good example is in the property and commercial teams, we might have a project which involves giving procurement advice and contract advice to begin with, and then turn it in, and if it's a property related matter, would turn into creating a development agreement or a commercial lease. We would open a different matter for each aspect of that, but they would be cross-referenced within the case management system. So if somebody wants to know the total time spent on a particular project, we would call all those in together to give a total time and be able to break it down into each individual matter within that project.
Is that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, perfect, very clear, thanks.
Have I got any more questions? I will ask my questions now. Thank you. In terms of the table on 3.8, Teresa, that allocates the budgets, I think I found it confusing. I understand what you did. The total budget for Babergh and Mid-Suffolk District Councils is 613,000. But in your table, you've actually added West Suffolk Council, which actually at the bottom line doesn't add up. I understand why you've done it. Can you see that in the table you've put the three councils together? Is that, or have I misunderstood that? I make Babergh and Mid-Suffolk District Councils total 613,500. Yeah, so in fact it should have added in then, shouldn't it? I thought, thank you, because I thought I was a bit worried I'd misunderstood that, so thank you for that. My other question is really about judicial review. And if I refer you to page 30, if you're looking at, I understand, I'm on the planning committee, so I understand the principle of judicial review. Can you just clarify, and you may not be able to, can you clarify for me, is the judicial review requested by the applicant, or can it be requested by another person?
So the applicant would appeal against the decision. A judicial review application generally comes from an interested party.
Which which may not be the applicant.
The applicant would go down a different route. They would appeal. It would be any other interested party, with their only remit would be judicial review, whereas the applicant's remit is to appeal against the decision.
Okay, so it's two separate. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Members, Councillor Barrett.
Sorry, just coming quickly at the end there. I was going to ask us a little bit about Section 106 agreements. Yes, nasty Section 106 is. Have you any views on whether they will continue, and whether, or do we have any influence over when they are used as opposed to SIL, or because they seem to take an awfully long time? So do we have any sort of jurisdiction over that, or is it just that there will always be those agreements as well as SIL?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I just don't know the answer to that question. But what I can say is, yes, Section 106s can take some time to complete. A lot of that is outside the control of the authority or your legal service, because there are so many parties to bring to that one document, including county council, there may be a developer, there may be the developer's agent, there may be other interested parties like the Highways Authority. But I really can't say whether there's any change afoot or anything, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Just before we go to debate, can I just remind the committee that it is 3 years since this service was actually reviewed, and I think in that time there's been a change, certainly in the membership of this committee and in the circumstances that surround our world, really, that could impact this service. So you may need to bear that in mind when as we go to debate. So can I open the debate, please, for members? Thank you.
On that note, Chair, I think I was here 3 years ago, weirdly, for a brief period on overview and scrutiny when we did present questions and so on, and oddly enough coming back for this one. So, but just to kick off.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I found this really interesting, this process. It's, I can understand some councillors would like to see more information in there, but this is an incredibly complex way of working out how which authorities use in what, and I think it works. I think it's very sensible, and it's very fair as well. One thing, when I looked at this, it was putting Babergh and Mid Suffolk together. For me, it was, I thought, well, maybe we're not quite at that stage yet, but it sounds like work's been done now to separate them, which is moving forward for me. But yeah, I think it's a really good report. Yes, there could be more information there, but I think we could easily drown in information when we've got a lot of very useful information here. So it's really good to have this. If we were doing this outside, we had a legal firm taking care of this, we wouldn't have the weight to, if we get a judicial review or anything happens, to move those resources around these councils. So I think resource-wise, this is exactly the right way to be running it. It's hard to work out what the workload of different departments is from this, but I think that's why you have managers and you have people watching that. So yeah, thank you for your for answering the questions, and I think it's a very good report.
Councillor Gould.
Yes, thank you. I was pleased to note that For example, at 3.13, or 3.14, sorry, that there are still some areas that we can't cope with in-house, because it is such a, as Councillor Casson says, it's such a huge subject. So I was comforted to know that when this is the case, we actually do buy in the external advice and skills that we need. So that struck me as good, because the page before that, on 3.12, I have made myself a note that do we do some kind of skill audit of the staff, so that the skills of the staff reflect the topics that are being covered. So when I then got down to 3.14, I thought, that has answered my question. So thank you.
Councillor Welland.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could ask a question. I know we're in debate, but just something which has come to mind. And going back to, I was actually employed once upon a time many years ago, and one of the concerns there about external services, which are just sort of a little shift away from the actual authority, was around the quality of the instructions that were given, particularly in the early days. So I wonder if you could each give me just a flavour of whether the quality of the instruction by the instructing officer to the shared legal service is improving, has reached a stage where it is satisfactory, or whether there is still room for improvement. But I guess also that these sorts of, if there are these sorts of problems, that they would be discussed at your quarterly meetings.
Yes, it's a constant improvement. We're on a constant route to improvement. We're never perfect, we recognise that. So we're in constant dialogue with our instructing officers about instructions. From day one to now, we've created instruction pro formas, which are reviewed, which allows the instructing officer to understand what information we need to enable to do the piece of work they want us to do for them. We have regular meetings, workshops with instructing teams to make sure the quality of the instructions create a quality of work at the end of the day. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
I think I was really sort of asking if Emily was aware of any need for improvement, or whether there, when new staff come along to the two districts, I guess they need to be trained in how to instruct the shared legal service. I just wanted to know that was all working smoothly, because that interface can cause difficulties in some authorities. I have experienced in the past, many years ago.
Can I add, Chair?
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add to Teresa's response, I actually think this is one of the real success stories of the shared legal service. The quality of instructions, I think, is dramatically improved to when the service was first set up, because I think people had the bad habit of just wandering down the corridor and going and talking to the lawyer and thinking that was sufficient to give them an instruction. What we now have is a really clear document that sets out what the instructing officer wants to achieve from that piece of legal advice or that activity, and it enables then Teresa to go back and evaluate whether that outcome was actually achieved by the team or not. So it's also a mechanism for sort of performance management and quality control. So from my perspective, that's a real success story, and I think in a high percentage of cases we have very good instructions, and there's always a few people that we just help a little bit with completing the form in the right way. But it's a much better situation than when it was first created in 2016.
Thank you. I wonder, is attendance at, say, planning committee a significant part of the workload of certain members of staff? I'm aware that there are certain members of staff who regularly attend. Is that a significant part of the workload? Is that one instruction that will last for the year, or one instruction for each meeting?
We don't class attendance at meetings and instruction. That's just part of our role. Right. We're a legal support service. But we try to have a continuation of service for members, so that members recognise the legal advisor at their particular committee meeting. So you may have a particular officer attend a Babergh or Mid-Suffolk committee meeting, and a different officer attend a West Suffolk, simply so the members get to know them. But they can swap about if necessary, so if somebody's off ill, somebody else can step in.
Councillor Welland, we did have a period of time for questions.
Sorry?
We did have a time for questions.
Yeah.
This is the debating part of the meeting.
Right, so I'm just wondering, thank you very much for the report and the answering the questions. I just feel that because we have a number of joint initiatives, the two districts, and I understand from the officers that there's going to be a split between, presently the charge goes to Babergh, Mid-Suffolk or to West Suffolk, then it's split. Now it's going to be split so that will be split at the time of instruction. I just wonder, Chair, whether, because there are so many joint initiatives, whether there ought to also be a cost centre around the joint initiatives, because otherwise they've got to be split and added together, split and so on. I just wonder if that can be, if we can find a way of tidying that up.
Are you suggesting that goes into some sort of recommendation, Councillor Welland?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I think that we
Can we
ought to.
just continue with the debate if the committee... Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much. Sorry, you were just about to go. I'd like to see more performance stats if this were to come back. And I appreciate it's 3 years' time. It's a long lead-in time. But perhaps in our recommendations we could include that so that it's picked up. Because looking at we don't need to understand that the department is busy. I think we all appreciate that. Appreciate they've got a large volume of matters and instructions. But looking at those figures, they only tell half the story. Some of those matters may have been on their list for a long time, waiting to be resolved. I know of 2 cases that I've been dealing with, and they are taking some time, one considerable amount of time. And I think that is a subject that we as councillors should be aware of if matters are just not seem to be progressing at a satisfactory rate, at least to seek an explanation. So I think that's what we would need. So I'd like to see that in some recommendations. Thank you.
Are there any other committee members? Councillor Ekpinion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Councillor Barrett's actually picked up on a point I wanted to highlight, because I think while the data that's been provided at a cursory glance is useful, it's not as meaningful as it possibly could be in my view. It's not clear to me really how the different types of work are dispersed within this shared legal service, and I appreciate that it's a very good service, as has been mentioned. And I think we need to see information that really passes this in terms of how the council is, certainly Babergh and Mid-Suffolk are organised, for it to really have significant meaning for us and allow us to investigate it in a more meaningful way. And so I in addition to the performance issue that Councillor Barrett has raised, I'm also keen to understand the split of work between the different sections of the council as we understand it now. I'd also like to understand, especially with regard to the chart in 3.11, what has been the trend there, irrespective of the situation caused by the pandemic. Because I think it's important to understand the direction of travel of these different elements and how that could possibly or potentially impact the resources of the shared legal service going forward. So I think there are elements here that still need to be addressed, and I think that should be encompassed in the recommendation, because I'm not really able to make significant, meaningful determinations from the data provided today.
Thank you. I'd like to say that this is a very detailed and thorough report, which is helpful. But reading it and some of the answers, it has given me some concerns when reading it. It is clear that we are currently set up in a way that is protective if we should split, which way I see that gives a bit of we're also working as well at different pay levels for different councils, but we're doing a joint service. And the way I read it, if I was working for it, I'd be concerned about a bit of job security, because you're set up in a way that if we are likely to split, we're protecting the councils. We're set up in a way where you can be doing the same job as somebody, but get different pay grade if we have been in. So we are united, but divided, and we've got the additional way of doing payback for different workloads, which are surely causing more of a HR thing, which is causing us more financials and more work in making sure that this is working, than if we had a united front or if we had a single pay level, if we had a more interconnectivity. So we're either covering ourselves by having a joint one but not being joint, an additional overway, or to me, there'd be kind of if I was working in that environment, I'd be a little concerned about what the future would hold. Are we splitting, are we not? And is it fair for people working for us, where we could have been employed next door and get more money? Are we going to look to jump to one council to the other for the same job? I also have concern with the way I know it's changes we've implemented that have changed to the different titles, coming down to which, the officer coming down saying this is going underneath one title and it's going down. Surely there could be a degree of human error doing that way, having these simultaneous current open titles going down to the officers. Could there be a mistake of being put into underneath the wrong heading, keeping that heading going when it's not necessarily needed to put that heading any further? Could there be any issue, could there be any confusion as to what inbox it eventually ends up on? I know it can't be back-channeled, you can't move it over, but surely that's going to have some additional strain with human error. And I'm afraid there is a question mixed up in there, because it was a question that's been raised by Councillor Wellham that hadn't occurred to me beforehand. But if it hadn't occurred to me about officers having to attend meetings as additional part of it's part of a workload. Are all meetings in the same building for all the councils? If so, are all officers having to do the same amount of journeys to these meetings? Is like a planning officer having to travel solely to Endeavour House to do the meetings, or are there other officers they have to travel to? Is that reflected in extra journey times, extra workloads? Is it all that reflected into the into the count of the workloads? Is it reflected to? Is the same officer having to do all the Mid Suffolk, West Suffolk, or is there different planning officers that will do for West Suffolk that would do there? How is that working out, and how is that affecting these officers? Is there additional strain for them? So how is that recognised? Yeah.
Can I just ask, Emily, do you feel happy to respond to those concerns raised by Councillor Carter? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I will probably bring Teresa in terms of the deployment of staff to different activities, just to talk about how staff are assigned to different roles and what that means in terms of journey times and that sort of thing. So just for a point of clarification, no legal officer is paid differently for work at the same level. So all of the lawyers are on the same pay scale, all of the legal assistants are on the same pay scale, all of the legal business partners are on the same pay scale. So they are on different pay scales because each authority has a different pay scale, but within a single job role, nobody is paid different. So there is no unfairness in terms of being paid differently for the same work. So just to provide you with that reassurance. We have considered transferring all of the staff over to a single employer to have that consistency of terms and conditions. We haven't made that decision at the moment. We didn't feel like the disruption of being transferred into a different employer was appropriate at the time, but it is something that the Legal Services Steering Board would keep under review. But I just want to really reassure you that no member of staff is disadvantaged by virtue of their employing authority, and there's no case of kind of sitting next to somebody who's being paid more for the same level of work. We work really hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. And just on the directorate label, really that's a label that we give to the matter within the case management system. It doesn't have any bearing on the team that the work is allocated to. So there's no danger of the work being misallocated. So, you know, the property team wouldn't end up with a licensing matter, for example, because of that goes through a filter with the admin team and they make sure that the cases are properly allocated when they come in. Teresa, did you want to talk about the staff kind of location of work?
Yep, so we don't look at people in my team. I forget who's their employing authority because we just look at ourselves as a team working across 3 authorities. In terms of how we select who would attend, let's say Development Control Committee for Babergh, we would select one of our planning lawyers. Our lawyers are all employed by Babergh Mid Suffolk, and some of them live very locally, so they would probably pick the most local person to reduce that travel time for them. But equally, they would travel. I've travelled here today from Bury St Edmunds to attend here, but that's just because that's where I live. It doesn't, and I'm the service manager. It has to be here. If I lived in Ipswich, it would be exactly the same. I would still be attending here. It's not. We don't select the location to the officer. Does that answer your question?
Was that helpful, Councillor Carter?
Certainly is. Does raise the point, however, with the travelling in with officers, is it mandatory for them to be in physically in the meeting, or could it be done remotely in a remote attendance with teams for them to still be there to answer the questions but without having to journey time? And would that be a benefit to them?
At the moment, we don't have hybrid meetings across the authorities, but there's certainly that's being looked into. At the moment, it's required that the legal advisor is in attendance along with the committee for those regulatory committees. Other meetings, we would appear remotely, and we're 95% of the time working from home as a team at the moment.
Okay. I think if members are agreed, I think we've had a good debate on this. I'd like us to consider this report is for noting only, but we are requested, or if we're minded, to add some recommendations, and members have raised different things that they feel. Councillor Wellham, shall we start with? Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to add, Chair, I believe I've captured 2 members what their thoughts were. I didn't catch Councillor Wellham, so I was just going to ask if Councillor Wellham could just repeat what his possible recommendation was, and then I can read out the
yes,
other
okay,
part
that's
as well.
fine. Thank you.
Chair, yeah, I'm quite happy to go back and repeat what I said, but I'm just a little bit concerned that it's almost like micromanaging them, and I just wondered if the officers would say that it's something that they would look at rather than we actually have to put it into a recommendation. If we had to put it in a recommendation, then I would say something like this. We note that the shared legal services setting up separate cost centres for each of our 2 sovereign authorities, and we ask that as much of the activity of the 2 authorities involves joint initiatives and actions, an appropriate cost centre be set up. Now, rather than, if I could have a couple of nods from the left, then I don't think it needs to be a recommendation.
Emily.
Thank you, Chair. I have just jotted down a proposed recommendation that the committee might like to adopt, albeit I probably have a declaration of interest given that the recommendation will come my way to action. So if I just read that out, Chair, and then the committee can decide whether that reflects your discussion. The recommendation would be that the Legal Services Steering Board reviews the recharging mechanism for the costs of the legal service and considers whether the performance monitoring arrangements are sufficient. The decisions of the Legal Services Steering Board will be presented back to the committee via an information bulletin after its meeting in December.
Chair, that covers my point. I don't know whether it satisfies Councillor Eppingham and Barrett.
Councillor Eppingham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm happy with that particular element of recommendation, but I think we probably need a second recommendation which can come back at a future report, which is to look at the trend of the performance in terms of the different elements of litigation, property and so forth. Because I think the charts themselves in the current report are a snapshot as the service manager pointed out, and what I would be keen to see is what is the trend of these data points. So at the next reporting opportunity, then I think that's what we should be recommending to see.
Thank you. Councillor Muller.
Yes, I'm perfectly happy with Emily's proposal for one of the recommendations, but I totally agree with what Councillor Eppingham and obviously Councillor Barrett mentioned, that we do need another recommendation regarding performance, etc. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Barrett.
Can I just check that the wording that Emily has just proposed on, did you say consider whether performance stats are sufficient? So is that for your department to consider? Right. I feel what we want is to definitely see more performance targets in that report. So I don't know, you could...
That would be in the second recommendation.
Yeah. As long as that is absolutely coming back to this committee, because it sounds like you already gathered those stats anyway. So it's just a matter of us being able to understand them better. I would like to see that.
Chair, if I may, I think the performance trends could be reported back in the information bulletin so that you would see it fairly soon after this meeting rather than waiting for another sort of periodic review of the service. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Barrett, we do collate performance management data, and we do feed in through the cabinet's monitoring of performance across the organisation. So it should be fairly easy for us to present that information to you.
Sorry, I didn't put my mic on. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I had to wonder, if we are making a recommendation, could we put in there about looking into the hybrid meetings of officer attendance? Surely it's a matter of the semantics of whether or not they're physically in a room with a meeting or whether they're attending with the addition of the technology. Would it not be beneficial to actually look further into putting in these? Because it would reduce journey time for officers, and we could still have a functioning a meeting with members in attendance and officers being virtually in attendance.
Emily, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Teresa has mentioned, at the moment it is a legal requirement for any officer who is advising the committee to be present in the meeting room in much the same way that attendance means in person for members. But I entirely agree with you, Councillor Carter. We've demonstrated during the pandemic that we can operate effectively and lawfully and actually more accessibly during by having virtual meetings. So, you know, we are always looking for opportunities to lobby for a return to hybrid or virtual, or even just to have the ability to choose for ourselves as an authority how we want to hold meetings. And I note that Norfolk Council has just recently lobbied the government on a return to virtual meetings, so that may be something that our councils would want to think about, perhaps by way of a motion to full council.
Councillor Ekpinior.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Emily. In her comment about bringing forth information with the information bulletin, would that include some historical data about that I'm asking for, so we can see the trends?
Yes, absolutely. We'd bring the performance trend data into that information bulletin, so you can see the journey over a period of time.
Can I just ask the question of the committee? As I said at the outset, that it's 3 years since this was reviewed. Do we feel that is the period of time that we need to review this service, or do we need to review that? Is 3 years too much or too little? Councillor Moore.
I think 3 years is quite a reasonable time, but what we were saying previously, I'd sort of like to perhaps add to that. The plan is obviously to split Babergh and Mid Suffolk in the statistics from the new financial year starting in April 22, and although I agree with Emily, we can have an information bulletin of the various figures, etc., fairly recently for our next meeting. I think it would also be helpful to have one perhaps 6 months after the split, in sort of just under 12 months' time as well. Thank you, Chair.
Other committee agreed with that? Sounds reasonable.
So, Chair, I might need a couple of minutes just to discuss this with the monitoring officer, just to get the wording right, so all elements have been covered, if that's okay, Chair. To take a short break, if that's okay.
You want a short break before we actually come?
Yeah, so that I can get all the members can be confirmed in the wording.
Committee, I think we'll have a short break of how many minutes? 10 minutes?
That'd be more than enough, Chair.
Yeah. So, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, may I just echo the recommendations that have been put forward. I thoroughly agree with them, and particularly with Councillor Muller here. I would just like to thank Teresa and Emily for their excellent report and the excellent way that they've responded to the questions that were asked. They were quite considerable, and you had to, wasn't like going through treacle, but you did it well. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, before we go to the break, I'd like to just say that, because we might not get the chance when we come back. Teresa, thank you so much for you put a lot of hard work into the report, and for Emily, who's been, you know, very supportive of all the questions and the queries that we've raised. So if we just close the session at the moment and come back in 10 minutes, thank you very much.
Sorry, session's closed. Doesn't matter. I was going to ask whether or not the
ready, committee members, can I call us to order again? And we're continuing where we were before the break. And so I'll ask the governance officer to organise the recommendations and read them to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I believe the monitoring officer will read them out, and then the motion that will be in the Untitled Vote will be that the committee note the contents of the report and presentation to the overview. That the contents of the report and the presentation to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee be noted, and that the committee approve the recommendations as read out by the monitoring officer, which will follow now, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So recommendation 1 is that the Legal Services Steering Board reviews the recharging mechanism for the costs of the legal service and considers whether the performance monitoring arrangements are sufficient. The findings of the Legal Services Board will be presented back to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee via an information bulletin after its meeting in December. Recommendation 2 will be that the information bulletin in recommendation 1 also includes historical and current performance monitoring data, which will enable the committee to observe the trends in performance over time. And then recommendation 3 will be that a further information bulletin is presented to the committee 6 months into the new financial year, demonstrating the split of new matters between Babergh and Mid-Suffolk. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. Are the committee happy with those recommendations? Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Ekpignon, and seconded by Councillor Carter. The governance officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Councillor Phillips, can I take your vote verbally, please? 4. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Chair. Yes, Councillor, sorry. Thank you, Chair. That's all votes have now been received, and that is a unanimous vote for the proposal.
Thank you. Shall we go on to item 10? And this is the JOS/21/14 Task and Finish Group for scoping of transport in the districts. And I want to ask Councillor Wellham if he will introduce the item. Thank you, Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Task and Finish Group was set up following the resolution of Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 19th of July. Its purpose was to consider whether or not to fully scope a review of the provision of public transport in rural areas. The group heard from a number of witnesses, including officers of the County Council and our district councils, and also from the service managers of community transport providers in Babergh and Mid-Suffolk. The main points covered in the presentations and the responses to questions from members of the Task and Finish Group are given on pages 36 and 37 of our papers. It became clear that most residents of the districts have little knowledge of connecting communities, and there is very little promotion of the services they provide. The providers operate under contracts from SCC. The contracts run from around 5 to 8 years. The breadth of service provided in each of the 2 districts varies significantly. The group believes that connecting communities provides vital services to residents who are aware of what is available. However, there are other providers, including volunteer groups. Provision of rural transport would benefit from joined-up working and promotion of all available services and how to access them. The County Council have submitted a bus service improvement plan for 2022-23, and this will be updated for 23-24. SCC will be working with bus companies to agree enhanced partnership arrangements. It's timely to scrutinise the way connecting communities and other transport services are provided in our districts. Our findings will help inform the preparation of the enhanced partnership and the 2023-24 bus service improvement plan. The recommendation to members of this committee from the Task and Finish group is set out on page 38. If members agree the recommendation, the Task and Finish group could be invited to continue their work, firstly to scope a review and then to carry out that review and report back. So, Chair, I'd like to move the recommendation that we carry out a full scoping exercise, but not that we carry out that exercise today, but that it is given to the Task and Finish group for them to continue their work.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. I would like to take questions, we can debate, but I'd rather keep the questions and the debate separate. Otherwise, we might get a bit confused. So can I ask any members who've got any questions for Councillor Wellham? Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with absolutely with the introduction that Councillor Wellham has done. I have said that it's a question of actually positioning Suffolk County Council with the bus operators to get something done, because you know, so I would say how are we going to attempt to get this format better organised, I should say. So by all means, I find it very difficult to when you have a planning applications where they talk about transport and nothing ever gets done. Thank you.
Can you answer that question, Councillor?
Was there a question there? I think it sounded like a message of support, and I wondered whether Councillor Osborne was actually seconding the recommendation that I put forward. So if there is a specific question, can I... Sorry, I was listening so intently.
If I may, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Yes, my real question is, it's the position of Suffolk County Council with the bus operators, and do you believe that you'll be able to get some coherent agreement with what's not going on at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the enhanced partnership and the bus service improvement plan will not just be in terms of the service operators, the bus service operators, the bus companies with their scheduled services. What I think we need to provide to the group that's working on the bus service improvement plan is the information that they need to ensure that the gaps are filled in. Connecting communities, I think, are contracted to the county to fill those gaps. I think we realise that they're not doing it as efficiently as they might, and they're not aware of everything that's going on. But somebody needs to bring this all together so that the bus services are the bus services, and all of the gaps where there are no bus services, those are filled in a coherent fashion and advertised.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank Councillor Wellham for that, and I'm very much prepared to second your proposal.
Have we any more questions from Councillor Wellham? Right, we'll go straight into debate. Do members wish to debate this subject? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Chairman. I just think this focus needs to be very clear in what it's hoping that it will achieve. I mean, is it about communication, better communication about the transport service that exists, but to highlight where there are gaps in need? I could understand that in terms of our role within this. if it goes much wider than that, then I think it's in danger of failing, because you're a small committee, and I don't quite understand how you can achieve anything wider than that.
Councillor Wallen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. But I would say that I don't think we've got to find every gap. I think we've got to show to the County Council that there are gaps, and they've got to find them and they've got to fill them. It's not up to us to say such and such a village needs a bus for market day in the nearest town. We just have to point out that there are gaps, and there are providers, and those gaps can be filled with better coordination, and it's down to the County Council to do that coordination.
Does that reassure you, Councillor Barrett?
Yes. I mean, what also timescales can Councillor advise us about when that work might be completed?
Well, I think it depends whether it's given to the Task and Finish group to do, or whether it's going to keep coming back to this full joint committee, which will obviously take much longer. I think the Task and Finish group can get on with it reasonably quickly, and I would say that probably around February, March, we ought to be coming back to this committee with a recommendation of what we need to report on to, well, primarily onto officers at Suffolk County Council.
Is that? Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Just to reassure everyone here, we have already checked with officers what our role is to scrutinise, and we have got the remit to scrutinise members or partner organisations and members that operate within our communities. So we may not have the overall say to be able to change anything ourselves, but it is our, not necessarily our right, but for our constituents, we have a duty to highlight areas that are failing within the community that can be improved upon, and do whatever we can to bring attention to it and to make other councils aware or other organisations aware. We know there's an issue, they need to know an issue, and they need to get it sorted. So it's our role as a council to light a fire up their backsides, in a way, to put it nicely, to say that they need to get something done, and we need to get this done for our constituents. So whether or not we have the power to ultimately change something, we've got the power to bring attention to it, to bring media to it, and we have a responsibility to do this. So scrutiny is ultimately the right place to do it, and if it hadn't already been seconded, I'm thirding it. So
Quite got there, Councillor Carter, but okay. Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I do share Councillor Barrett's concerns, because when I go through this, it sort of dips in and out of Suffolk County Council business. I don't want the scrutiny committee to do anything that they don't add value to, and I think we've got to be very careful where we're going with this, whether we're going for an authority that is organising the bus services and dealing with that as an authority that doesn't have any remit on this. The original scope for this, for me, was what can Mid-Suffolk and Babergh do to improve transport links. And I think a lot of this has got a little bit too obsessed with Suffolk County Council and things that they're dealing with and they're managing. We've got £100,000 in the last budget going to sustainable transport in this area. We need to be looking at what we can do, what Mid-Suffolk and Babergh have control over, and what we can change. And I think telling Suffolk County Council what they're doing wrong is going to be a waste of the committee's or any work group's time. So I'm just concerned at how we go through here, and there's several things that I really do agree with, but there's certain things that I think that's not really what I was expecting this work group to do.
Thank you, Councillor Caston. Before we go on to anybody else, can I have your advice on this? Are we working outside of our remit as a scrutiny committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, you're absolutely not working outside of your remit. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee is able to look into anything that is of interest to residents in our 2 districts. So you do have quite a wide remit. You are able to scrutinise the work of other public authorities who operate within the 2 districts. So you can look at services provided by other councils, but unlike certain statutory functions, the other council doesn't have to respond or doesn't have to comply with a request to come to a meeting to answer questions. So it's on a very much a collaborative basis, and therefore I would suggest that Councillor Caston's points about making sure that you approach it in the right way, and it's not seen as just a criticism of services that are provided, but an exercise with a real genuine interest in improving the arrangements for your residents. That's the right way to go. So it's about being constructive in that scrutiny exercise with any of those external partners. Thank you.
Caston, does that answer your question?
Yeah, just to come back on that, when I've heard language like failed and that kind of language used in this meeting already, and I don't want this to turn into some headline that the scrutiny committee is trying to put against another authority that are doing the proper job on certain the proper procedure and dealing with things. And it does concern me that this is turning into something that the scrutiny, a non-political entity, should be very careful, proceed with caution.
Councillor Caston. Councillor Ekpinior.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand Councillor Caston's reservations, but as has been pointed out, this Overview and Scrutiny Committee does have the remit to look at any aspect of life that affects our residents, and this is definitely one of them. And it's an issue right across many different aspects of concern. The sustainability issue. There is the fact that we thought at the prior meeting that the services that were on offer weren't very well communicated. And of course we do recognize that there are gaps in the service, and maybe we may have suggestions as to how those gaps might be filled, and obviously it's up to Suffolk County Council how whether they take that on board and what they do with it. But it seems to me that that there's nothing wrong at all with us highlighting the issues that our residents feel with regards to transport, and it is an important issue, and that we bring that to the attention of the County Council as the overriding authority on transport, and hopefully they will do something about it. And you yourself were very keen to see what they could do in terms of advertising the services, and indeed what we were going to be doing in order to have a more cohesive and comprehensive network that not only serviced the communities that we represent, but actually did that in a sustainable way. So I believe that if we stick to that, which more or less the recommendation does, then I think we will be able to add value in providing a steer to the County Council about what our residents want.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. my feeling is that, and clarification would be handy here, Councillor Wellham, is that in the past where we've had voluntary services, bus services that could go to existing bus stops, we were told quite categorically that the two bus companies that were operating on these bus stops would not allow, because of licensing, I believe, that they are licensed to those bus companies, and therefore, if there was more movement in the way that those bus stops could be used by other voluntary organisations, such as, and I will quote, Go Start in Sudbury, then perhaps it would help the whole of the transport situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Wellham.
Yes, yes, Chair, I agree with Councillor Osborne, but I don't think our role is to solve the problems. I think our role is to identify where the problems are and to identify where the opportunities are, by way of finding out what is being provided, why it's not being used, but then not to try to change the bus services in any way. The county council has got to change the way that the services are provided in terms of your big red buses and so on. But what we need to do, I think, is to highlight where the gaps are in those services. And the district council is a consultee on the bus service improvement plan. And what better way to give that information back to the county than via the Overview and Scrutiny Committee? Otherwise, it would be left to officers who, have got enough to do. I think we can really add value by informing our officers of what needs to go back to the county by way of the response to the consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. I've got to say, as chairman, you don't get the opportunity really to make a comment, and I would like to just make a comment on that. I was on the Task and Finish group, and one of the things that I found was that my residents didn't know anything about the Community Connection Service. And I think Councillor Ekpin-Young and I were in the same position on that group, that little was known about what was, especially for areas like Shotley Peninsula, in which I'm a ward member. And when I asked the question, and I did speak to the lady responsible after our meeting, and I asked what advertising and publicity was about their service of Community Connections. And she said that there'd not been anything since 2016. So I think that we have got an opportunity to pursue that. So are we ready to make recommendations, committee? Or Councillor Gould, did you?
Chair, if I may. So we have the resolution that was put forward by Councillor Wellham and seconded by Councillor Osborne. I'll just read it out for clarity's sake so that everyone is aware. That the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolved that the Task and Finish Group undertake a full scoping exercise on transport in the districts. Is that acceptable to the proposer and seconder?
Yes, Chair. That's very wide-ranging. I think that the Task and Finish Group will take away from this meeting how that needs to be narrowed down. So yeah, I'm content with that.
So, proposer, Councillor Phillips, seconder, Councillor Carter.
Sorry, we have a proposal from Councillor Wellham and then Councillor Osborne seconded it.
Oh, sorry, my mistake. Yeah, well, to the fourth.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. Is this in addition or in replacement of the resolution that was at the bottom of the paper we received?
This is the one that the committee today will be making. That was the resolution of the Task and Finish Group, that it come back to this committee to then decide whether it to be scoped out, if that makes sense. So that was the resolution of the previous, It was the resolution of the Task and Finish Group, and this is the decision for today to then go and fully scope it out after the meeting in the Task and Finish Group.
Could we just hear the resolution again, because I'm a little bit confused?
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor. So the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolved that the Task and Finish Group undertake a full scoping exercise on transport in the districts.
Chair, that's only taking one step. I think we want the task and finish group to actually carry out the scoping exercise and carry out the exercise, not just come back here in a couple of months' time having scoped it. We want them to do it. To scope and carry out a review of, or whatever the other words were.
It seems to me, Madam Chairman, the preamble ought to be what Councillor Wellham said, which is to instruct, for this committee to instruct the tasks and finish group to actually do what was said in our resolution, which is review the effectiveness, blah, 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 blah. I think that would cover everything.
I think
and
so.
then actually focus us on what we intended to do.
Chair, I think the discussion is whether the whole committee undertakes the review or whether you want to delegate it to the working group. Am I right?
Yes.
Chair, I think my concern with what the governance officer read out was that he referred to the scoping exercise, not to the exercise. We need to carry out the exercise, not just to scope it and then come back. So I don't think there's anyone here who believes that the whole committee should carry out the exercise. So it is an instruction to the task and finish group. And I think the instruction to the task and finish group is to do it, not to scope it.
Yeah.
Well, both, but obviously I don't believe that we should be reporting back to this committee with just the scoping done. We need to get on and do it.
No, okay, can I just say as chair, Councillor Wellham, I agree with you. I'm not sure what, Robert, I think we need to just reword that.
Yeah, I have reworded it in light of what members have just said, so if this is more acceptable as well. So I have got that the...
Have you just redone that then?
I haven't confirmed it, Chair.
No,
I thought
okay,
rather wait
so
than
let's just...
So I've reworded it so that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolved that the task and finish group scope and carry out the exercise. As it comes under that point, is that acceptable?
Are you
Sorry,
happy?
Emily wants to come in, Chair, if that's...
Emily?
Thank you, Chair. Of course, the committee can delegate both of those activities to the working group. My only concern is that the working group's findings will be reported back to the full committee before any decision is made. So if the committee hasn't been involved in either deciding the scope or signing off the scope, you may find that the working group presents you with information that doesn't fulfil your needs in terms of making a decision as a committee. So it's just, are you comfortable with the working group setting its own framework for the work that it will undertake?
Councillor Phillips.
I think that's going to be down to a question of trust in the individuals working on that particular task.
Councillor Barrett.
I think I would prefer to see the scoping exercise come back to committee, because I am possibly a little bit uncertain about the whether I would support the work of this task and finish group. So I would want to have some input into how wide a study that was going to be before it goes too much further.
Councillor Wellham, do you want to respond to Councillor Barrett?
No, I don't see the need to come back with the scoping done before we start, because that will just delay everything by a month. I think we need to get on and do it. If we don't get it done until after the the county have consulted the district on the next bus service improvement plan, we'll have missed the boat. The sooner we start, the better.
Apart from Councillor Barrett, are there any other committee members that support what she's saying?
Yes, I do actually. Sorry about this, Councillor Wellham. I think we need to come back. You're saying that we want to just get on with it, but I'm not sure that I know what it is until the scoping comes back to this committee.
Austin, were you wanting to contribute to that?
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that.
Councillor Wellham.
Can we not just put it to the vote and let them decide whether they go forwards with that, and then if it fails, then perhaps try another reword?
Okay. Shall we go to a show of hands? That it either goes to the full exercise, we leave it to the task and finish to go, or they scope, the task and finish group scope the exercise and come back to this committee with a report. So, how are we going to do that? Emily?
Thank you, Chair. You have got a motion on the table with a proposer and a seconder. So it would be appropriate to take the vote on the recommendation that the Governance Officer read out. If that fails, then the committee can look at an alternative recommendation.
Robert, it's up to you then.
Thank you, Chair. So I have that in the in mod.gov. So it reads as it was before, in the sense that it reads that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolved that the task and finish group scope and carry out the exercise. So that's currently what it is, and the vote will start now on that. Councillor Phillips, can I take your vote, please? 4. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. All votes have now been received, and that is 7 votes for and 3 against, so that is carried.
Thank you, committee.
Chair, before we move on to the next one, could I please have 2 seconds to get our guests into the chamber?
Absolutely. Can we just have a 5-minute break while our guests come and accommodate themselves at the end of the chamber? okay, Councillor Osborne? Are you? Yeah. Can I call the committee to order? So I want to continue with the agenda, which is item 11, and is JOS/21/15, scoping of Citizens' Advice Review, and I'm going to ask Councillor Wellham to present the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This would have been Councillor Scarf, but he's unable to attend today. So just a very, very brief introduction by way of a referral back to 2 years ago when a task and finish group of this committee was set up to review the Citizens' Advice Service across the whole of Suffolk. It was a joint review to which other district councils and the county council were invited. West Suffolk provided representatives, and so did Ipswich. And so we had a review of the service across the whole of Suffolk. We reported back, I was part of that task and finish group, we reported back. Our joint overview and scrutiny committee accepted the findings of the task and finish group and have subsequently agreed to review the service annually, not the whole service, because obviously we did that 2 years ago, but really to look at any current and recent impacts on service provision and how we might be able to facilitate change, how we can add value rather than to look at everything that they do and question them on every aspect of their work. So it's really, it would really be to look at recent impacts on their service.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. I'd like to welcome to the meeting Vicky Mosley, Corporate Manager for Communities, and Royston Emerson as Communities Officer. And I think following on your presentation just now, I would like to give them the opportunity to make some comments on helping us to review the Citizens' Advice Services. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think every year the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee reviews the impact and the work that the Citizens' Advice undertakes on, like I say, on an annual basis. And I believe that the Stowmarket and also Sudbury and District Citizens' Advice have been invited to your meeting in December to provide presentations on the work that they've completed over the last year. What we would like to try and do, and we will be meeting with them before that meeting, committee meeting, is to discuss with them. So they're both in receipt, as you know, of a revenue grant from us, and as part of that revenue grant, we set out criteria and sort of KPIs for them to try and meet and address throughout that year. So the meetings that we will have with them will be to look at their progress against meeting those particular KPIs, the support they've given, whether there's been their trend data, whether there's an emerging need that we hadn't anticipated that we might need to, or they might need to refocus some of their work. So that's what we're expecting from the presentations that will come to your committee. I think next month it's been scheduled for. And I think depending on the outcome of and whether or not you're satisfied with the information that comes back at that point, that might be best to then determine whether or not there's anything else further you would like for them to do. Because until we got some of that information, and certainly they have been working very hard in terms of against those KPIs, but until they've provided and presented some of that information, I think it would be quite difficult to scope that review now. It might be worthwhile waiting for that to happen and to have the opportunity to ask questions at that point. And if you would then think that further scrutiny is required, then we do so at that point. That would just be my observations, my advice.
Thank you, Vicky. Royston, do you want to make a comment?
No, just that I agree with what Vicky has said. We do work closely with the 4 Citizens' Advice Bureaus that we do fund through revenue grants on an annual basis. As you're probably aware, the Mid-Suffolk CAB and Sudbury and District do get the largest revenue grants from us as organisations.
Councillor Wallen, do you want to respond to Vicky or Royster?
Yes, Chair, I would like to respond because Councillor Scarf has set out the purpose of the review, and if they don't know what the purpose of the review is, how will they know what to present to us? I would have thought it would be helpful to them to have this information which is in this draft scoping document, because we don't want to hear about everything else, not hear about this. There are only a very few items that we would really like to hear about in detail, and in the limited amount of time that they will have for their presentations, if this is agreed, this is what we need to know. I don't think there's anything contentious there, but I think it will be helpful to us as a committee. Otherwise, we'll hear from them, and then we'll draft a scoping document, and we'll be a month further down the line, and we'll have had 2 bites of the cherry, and we can do it. I think we can do it all in one. Unless the officer's got some particular concern about anything that's in this draft scoping document, then yeah, I would far rather we went ahead and scoped rather than wait and see what they've got to say.
Vicky, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, please. Apologies, Councillor. I thought we were talking at slightly different purposes there. I agree with everything that's listed in this scope, and that's exactly what we would be expecting from that presentation. It was my understanding that you want to do something separate to that meeting in December. If it's the same thing, then that's absolutely fine.
No.
And sort of, if my memory serves me well, some of the presentations that were provided last year did focus on a lot of this information. So the meetings that Roy and I will have ahead of that presentation in December will be to go through the scoping once it's been confirmed and agreed by yourselves with them, to make sure that they do incorporate all the points that you've listed in that document. So I thought we were talking about 2 different exercises, and I really wanted to just save us some time and just do the one exercise. But if that's what you're considering, that's absolutely fine.
We're absolutely agreed with the content of the scoping document. Do you want to respond to that, Councillor?
I'm delighted to hear that. I just was a bit concerned there was something contentious in there that either our officers or citizens' advice had some reason for not wishing to inform us upon. So that's great. I think it still requires us then to fill in the other empty boxes, and I'll be subject to what other members of the committee have to say before we do that. It would be my suggestion that we just get on and fill up the scoping document.
Okay, so first of all, are you happy that you take questions first from the committee?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm happy to take questions. I think we just need to get on with it.
Councillor Ekpinion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is, what is the purpose of completing the scoping document if we're going to be getting a full presentation in a month's time from the relevant officers that covers all of these points? I don't see what value this can possibly add to anything, because presumably at the point at which we get the presentation, we will be able to question the officers as much as we need to.
Councillor Wallen.
I think the advice we were given last time was that if we filled in the scoping document, it would not just focus the minds of the citizens' advice people, but also focus our minds on, for instance, what are our expected outcomes. I mean, perhaps we could ask Emily whether she feels that it would be beneficial to this committee and to citizens' advice if we did complete the scoping exercise, or whether she feels that we'll get the same outcome either way.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the scoping document is as much for the committee's benefit as for the people coming to present information to you, because really the desired outcome from the scoping exercise is to set out what you hope to achieve by undertaking the review. So it's really to inform, who do you want to come to present information, what kinds of questions do you want to ask them, so that you can focus your activity on achieving an outcome that really adds value to the authority or to the residents or to the organisation that you're looking into. So I would almost say it's weighted in favour of the committee as opposed to those presenting in terms of its usefulness. I do think it's appropriate for you to be clear on the purpose of this review. I think officers have described quite clearly their expectation and the expectation of the representatives from CA, and they've mentioned that the questions that you've posed in your scoping document match that brief. So I think it is useful to share it. Whether you need to put any more into the document that you've already got in front of you, I think is for you to decide. But I do think we need to be cautious about not extending the scope too far and then making it impossible for the representatives to prepare that information to present to you in December.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor Wellham, I've got to say I am slightly confused myself. Can you just explain to us what you would like the committee to do just now? I think that would be helpful to all members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got the table document, and when I printed it off, naughty me, and I just started filling in the boxes. So, for instance, I feel we need to explain what the outcomes we expect, and I've written in there confirmation that the CAs are well managed and adequately funded for continuity of the service to the communities they serve. So that we only focus on that aspect. We want to know that they're well managed, we want to know that they're well funded, and we want to know that they've got continuity of service. One of the concerns, and the reason for that in there, is that some time ago when I was speaking to the Chief Executive Officer at Stowmarket, he was, this is during COVID, more severe COVID times, we're not out of it yet. His concern was that at the start of lockdown, a number of their volunteers felt that they were vulnerable and they didn't really want to they didn't want to go into the building, and they didn't want to have to get to grips with the technology that was involved around virtual meetings. So my understanding was at that time there were a number of volunteers who didn't continue. But I believe more recently there were other volunteers who are more used to using IT, so they've got new and different volunteers. So that's a good thing, but the downside is that they've lost the people who've been trained, they've gained some people who they now have to train. I feel we just need to know, as to district councils, that the service is, there will be continuity of service to the communities.
But I need some clarification, Councillor Wellham, because I understand the first page of that scoping document. I understand all those questions that you're raising. What I'm trying to grasp is, by completing the rest of the form, how that's going to benefit the committee. The committee have got to be prepared to ask the question of the citizens' advice services. And I just need some clarification why it's necessary at this point to complete all the rest of the form. Emily, can I have some advice on that?
Well, could I just say, I think it will provide focus to the meeting. I think it will be much easier to conduct the meeting if we know what our expected outcomes are, rather than we just have a discussion about how things are going.
Emily,
Chair, I'm just being advised by officers sitting with me that there are some outcomes actually listed in the grant agreement that we have with CA. So I think it may be possible for officers to take the scoping document away, populate it, share it with CA, and then make sure that committee members have sight of it before the meeting. So I think we could take that exercise away and fill in the rest of the boxes if the committee would like us to, rather than you having to fill it in on the spot today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Emily, for that, because when we had the last presentation from the CAs, the comment that Councillor Wellham wants to put in his outcomes was actually the outcomes that we talked about, which was the continuity of funding for the services and the issues around people leaving the service and having to recruit and train new supporters and volunteers, which I believe the chief executive of the Stowe Market branch put very clearly as to what their plans was. And they did, as part of the funding arrangement, these LCAs do have KPIs and outcomes that they have to achieve. And I think from my point of view anyway, that's what we should be holding them to, is that are they achieving those outcomes? And if they are not, then what needs to be done to help them achieve them? And I don't see there's going to be any value added for us to sit here and try and fill in these boxes today.
Phillips.
I understand what Councillor Pignon is saying, but I think there is a need for clarification from 4 members. It wasn't expected that the committee fill in this form. It was expected that they were, Councillor Wellham was given the okay to go and get this filled in correctly so that we could have the information to committee, as I understand it. I may be wrong in that.
Is that what you understood, Councillor Wellham?
My understanding was that before this meeting it would be filled in as much as it could be in terms of, well, it's page 3, it's the purpose, but that we would give a steer on what we wanted to get out of it. But I'm quite happy for the officers to complete the form. Very happy if that's the case. But I think it would be helpful to the officers and to us if we did discuss very briefly what we would like to see as outcomes. And for me, it's to ensure that there is continuity of service, that they have planned for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I had wondered if it would be possible to include or broaden within this a subject regarding the mental health of the volunteers. We do know that things have changed. They have had to focus on technology. We also know from our own experience with our own officers and ourselves, when you are focused mainly on a screen and separate from people, there's additional stresses and there's additional barriers. I want to know if they currently have the best technology available, if they have the best support available, and if there's more support that can be added, what can we do to help them? And also, specifically in a question, address it and ask what help would they like from us? If there is anything they specifically could think about in an ideal world, what can we do for them? Because we've at this moment in time, we have tasks implemented, we have ideals that we want to implement in here. They have their own agenda, they have their own to help as many people as possible. How can we help them? How do they want us to help them rather than how do we hold them into account? So if that could be specifically put in there, put better, more consistently than I can put it, but how can we help them? And if we can put that in a part of the document.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Vicky, have you made a note of that? Thank you very much. Would that be helpful, Councillor Carter?
Yes, thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we could be in danger here of asking questions that maybe need to be asked at the review, rather than us going into sort of, you know, minute details. I think these are the questions that need to be asked at the appropriate time, rather than us pulling it apart now. I don't know what to think about this scoping document. Part of me thinks that it may actually tie the hands of the CA a little bit, and that they may be so intent on filling this out with the details, because this is what I would call the known unknown. This is the stuff we know that we would like to know, but there might be stuff that the unknown that we don't know is there. And if the CAs are sort of intent on filling out this document, there may be things that they would have added to reports, but they didn't know that we want it. Does that make sense?
Sorry. I'm just got concerned we're going to get into a sort of administrative task that really we don't need to do. We've heard from the officers that they're happy to take the scoping document away. Do we need to make any more comments on that to the officers? Councillor Wellham.
Chair, I was trying to get my head around making a proposal that we, not that we don't talk about it anymore, but basically that we don't talk about it anymore, by way of saying that we've made our comments to the officers, and the officers will arrange for the scoping to be carried out, and the CA is informed. Whether that can be put into a proposal that we draw a line under it now and leave the rest to the officers.
Councillor Phillips, as you were here representing Councillor Scarf, have you got any comments you wish to add to that?
I fully endorse what I fully endorse that, and I think it's something that we need to do rather than just say we'll get this at the next meeting. We must do this.
We must do what?
The filling in of the scope.
You want to fill it in now?
No. Take it away. And
For the officers to take, yes, I think. Yeah.
To interrupt, Chair, it might be helpful because I have a draft resolution that possibly might help members in their decision on this. So, that the committee resolves to approve the scoping document included in the table papers with the amendments as discussed at the meeting, and that delegation is given to the monitoring officer to complete the remainder of the scoping document in consultation with possibly other officers present, if that's acceptable. Throw that out there.
I wonder if we could add to it that there's a timeline for that, and that we receive it before the meeting.
We could, the scoping document could be included as part of the agenda bundle for the next meeting, if that's acceptable. We wouldn't necessarily need to put that in the resolution, I'd say, Councillor, but we can put that in with the agenda bundle when it's...
No, that's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking it before the agenda bundle, and I will explain later why.
Chair, I think the governance officer is doing an admirable job at trying not to commit me to a timetable, so thank you for that. But committee, I'm more than happy to look at that in perhaps the next week and make sure that committee members have sight of it before the final copy is shared with CA. Thank you.
Does that satisfy your concern, Councillor Ekpignon? So, shall we proceed? Are we ready to go forward? We've had the proposal.
We don't actually have although I've read it out, Chair, we don't actually have a proposer and a seconder for that.
Oh, no, but we've got the recommendation.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for a proposer. And Councillor Phillips to second. Thank you. So we now go to the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Councillor Phillips, can I take your vote? 4. Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Thank you, Chair. That's all votes now received, and that's unanimous vote for the proposal.
Thank you. Thank you, members. We now go on to the forthcoming decision list. Oh, Councillor Phillips, sorry.
As unanimous vote for Councillor Phillips. Thank you.
So you can relay that back to Councillor Scarr. Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Thank you, Vicky and Royston, for your support. So we now go on to the forthcoming decision list. Are there any comments on that by members? Anything of interest that they need to raise? So that's for noting, Robert, thank you. Now we go on to the items 10 and 11, which are the work plans for Mid Suffolk and Babergh overview and scrutiny committees. Are there any comments on that? Councillor Wellham, thank you.
Yeah, just I think it's probably a typographical error or something. Under 20th of December and 16th of December of the Mid Suffolk, the review of local citizens' advice, the lead officer is not the Assistant Director Planning for Growth. So we just need to put the correct title in there for the but otherwise, yeah, I'm content with those.
Any comments? No. That's it. We're happy with the work plans. So the work plans are for noting, Robert. Well, members, we've come to the end of the meeting. Can I, Councillor? Oh, too soon, Councillor.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we've had a successful overview and scrutiny meeting, Madam Chairman. One thing that concerns me about our meetings and meetings in general at this council is the time it takes us to get the minutes of these meetings. And I'm concerned for two reasons. One is that, I don't know about others, but one's memory fades with time. And so being able to decide whether on the veracity and content of the minute, the ability to do that fades with that time. And I know the officers have a lot to do, but I fail to understand why we cannot get the minutes way before the next meeting, when things would still be fresh in our minds. And it doesn't apply just to this committee. It applies to every committee that I sit on in Mid Suffolk. And I don't think it's good practice. And the other thing I notice with the minutes of the meeting is that, unlike other committees, we don't appear to list the attendees of the overview and scrutiny committee. So it wasn't clear to me whether people were abstaining because they weren't present at the last meeting, or they just didn't like the content of the minutes. So I think I would like to suggest that we look into this and do something about it.
Emily, can we review that?
Yes, Chair, I'll take those points away and discuss them with the corporate manager.
The co-chairs would want to discuss that with you. Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Just a quick comment on the abstention side of things. So I quite understand what Councillor Epkin-Yong, sorry Paul, was saying, and I think it's fairly clear that if you weren't happy with the minutes, you would vote against them. But to know that someone's abstained because they weren't present at the meeting is quite valuable.
I actually agree with that, as you've raised it, because abstentions in most committees is because you're abstaining from the vote. But in fact, for a lot of us today, the abstention was because we were not present at the last meeting. And that's actually not quite clear, is it? Does that need to be clarified, Emily?
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat the...
Well, we have a vote result, which is an abstention. Now, in many committees, the abstention is because we actually don't agree, or we're not agreeing to either commit to or for or against. But in fact, our abstentions today, because I was one of those that was absent, it was the abstention number was because we were absent, and you're saying that's not clear, is it?
It's quite useful to know if there is specific reason for an abstention. If someone's not happy with the minutes, they should vote against them. But to abstain, you really should know why they're abstaining.
Yes. I think, unfortunately, in committees, we do get abstentions when people really should be against.
Well, minutes is different. I think it's mainly due to the minutes abstentions that Paul was talking about.
Yeah. Okay, is everybody... Councillor Caston.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think if councillors abstain because they don't agree with the minutes, they're not doing their job properly, and that's not how they should be looking at the minutes. But I think an abstention because you weren't at the meeting is very sensible. I would abstain if I wasn't at a meeting because I wouldn't comment on the minutes. But I think if we get to that process and the member hasn't pointed out why they've got a problem with the minutes and why they're not voting for them, that's a bit of a failing from that member, because they should really be bringing that up. Whether that happens or not, I don't know.
I quite support that. Councillor Gould.
Correct me here, but I thought we were voting on the accuracy of the minutes, not on whether we agreed with the content of them. So if we have read them and we've brought up any inaccuracies, surely we agree with them.
Emily.
I'm just conscious that we're discussing items that weren't on the agenda and the meeting is still open at the moment. But just to give you my advice, abstentions should really be used as a last resort. So you should always try to vote either for or against to make decisive action. We wouldn't ever record individuals' reasoning for abstaining, but of course when you're speaking to the motion you might set out that reasoning, and that it makes a lot of sense for you to explain that if you are going to abstain. On the point of minutes, you don't actually have to abstain by virtue of not having been at the meeting that the minutes relate to, but I do understand for lots of councillors you prefer to do that because you feel it's not appropriate to comment on the accuracy of a meeting where you weren't actually present. So it's not that it's not allowed, but equally it's not mandatory. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. I think actually that ought to be clarified across all councillors. For certainly that the intake of 2019, of which I'm one, abstention was seen as because you were absent. Councillor Wallen.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think you're about to move on to date of next meeting. Just to confirm that it is a joint overview and scrutiny meeting on the 20th, and the date listed for Mid-Suffolk on the 16th.
Because they're separate.
Now that meeting, those two meetings are the same, and they're both going to take place on the 20th. And I think I'm not sure whether we've formally agreed not to have the meeting on the 16th, but we're not having a meeting on the 16th.
Can I have a clarification on that, Robert?
That's correct. So the meeting in December will be a joint meeting, as discussed. That was we discussed that earlier this last week. The next meetings that will be separate will be the budgetary meetings that will be taking place in January.
Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Before I conclude the meeting, I see members are anxious to get home. I just want to say that Robert, our governance officer, is leaving the council and will not be with us at our next joint overview and scrutiny committee. And I mean, my time knowing you, Robert, has been in the last couple of years, but a lot of members have known you for a lot longer, and I want to say thank you for all the help and support that you've given various committees, because we met you on planning and such, and so thank you so much for all the work that you do on our behalf, and we wish you well in your new post in Colchester Borough Council. And I'm sure members will join me in our best wishes for him. Right, thank you members, that concludes the meeting.